of what MMT is, how'd you start, and the politics of it.
Sure. Let's do it, man.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So it is 8 p.m. on Monday, and like I said, on 8 p.m. on Monday, Steve Grumbine from the Real Progressives is going to be here, and Steve Grumbine is here from Real Progressive. Please tell him hi.
How are you doing, sir?
Doing good, doing good. So let me ask you this. I think a lot of the people who are my subscribers know who you are, but just for the people who don't, how did you start Real Progressives? For that matter, what is Real Progressives, and how did you start it? Or why did you start it? It's more the opposite.
Well, ironically, we started Real Progressives during the very beginnings of the Bernie Sanders campaign as a direct counter to people we felt were being rather hateful to progressives that named themselves Real Democrats. And so the idea was, yeah, we aren't real Democrats. You're exactly right. You couldn't be more correct. We're real progressives. And you know, a bunch of us that started it, we followed Stephanie Kelton more than Bernie Sanders. Bernie was secondary chief economist.
Right.
So that's how we ended up coming into loving Bernie. Once we knew his economics underneath of him anyway, maybe not necessarily everything he said, but the economics beneath the surface were sound. We were like, that's the one we're going for. We're going to get MMT out there.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Kelton. I've come across Kelton. I didn't realize that she was, I didn't realize she was running, she was a person responsible for Sanders' campaign. It's funny. You would hear Sanders say certain things like paying down the deficit and everything else. Unless that's politics, unless it's one of those things.
Well, let me tell you how Bernie would say it. Bernie is very slick in his wording. You have to be very careful to listen to what he says. Bernie Sanders would say, we got to reduce the deficit, but we're not going to do it on the backs of the 99%, right? So you say these things that were loaded statements. Now, we heard it because, think about this, just to put everything in perspective. Bernie offered up $33 trillion in new spending over 10 years. Think about it, $33 trillion in new spending, not just new, right? He offered up $19 trillion in taxes.
Deficit spending, yeah.
I wonder if there might be something going on there, right? Now, for those of us who understand economics, this was welcome news because the reason why we have been through such a long and nasty, drawn-out, horrific economic situation in this country is because going back way back, but really in steroids with the Clinton administration. A lot of people, you know, really got into this whole bashing W, which, God, he gave us plenty of reasons to bash him for real, but they ended up, because they don't understand economics, they don't understand federal financing, they don't understand what it means to be monetarily sovereign. They took it and said, well, Bush put the wars on the government credit card, and then he cut taxes, and he bankrupted the nation. We need a Democrat to save the country again. Problem is, taxes are literally the deletion of money, if you will. So if you think about, people always say, and it's really bad thinking, it's not true, but they think that, hey, we're going to print the money, you know? And so they get wrapped up in this term printing money, but we don't print money. That's a gold standard logic. And if you're an econ guy, you don't say print money. If you're a JV guy, you say, hey, are you going to just print money? But what it really is that the government always spends through keystrokes. Every single dollar the government spends has a velocity of 1, meaning it's only spent one time by the federal government. That money, once its life cycle completes, is a tax, and then it's deleted, it's purged. Way back in the early days in the 1800s, 1900s, etc., they just had a bunch of IOU books. And when they were done, they would go in and put them in a big burn pile, and they would burn them. People understood that once the obligation was paid, it was done away with. Today, people have this fetish about this, and they don't realize that dollars are destroyed when they're taxed, and they're spent into existence by our federal government. So
that's a good point. So let me ask you this. What's a basic understanding of MMT for the people who aren't? Because I understand where you're coming from. That part, I fully understood when I read the literature on MMT. But for the people who don't get the basic kernel of understanding of what MMT is, and for that matter, people were like, "What the hell is this guy talking about?" Can you give a basic understanding of MMT?
Sure, absolutely. So, modern monetary theory is it's currency analysis. Okay, so basically, it's the science of analyzing currency wherever it is. It doesn't matter whether it's the U.S., Japan, Canada, Venezuela, wherever. It describes currency wherever it's at, the EU, Greece, you name it. So in the United States, however, it describes the way our federal financing works. And something major changed in the United States in 1971. 1971, Richard Nixon removed us from the Bretton Woods Accord, which forever removed us from the convertibility of gold. So once we left the gold standard, you know, you hear people always talking about, oh, if they print more money, it's going to devalue the currency. It's going to blah, blah, blah. You know, we're talking about people that don't understand economics. Nobody with a brain for economics says that, because they understand that the reason why we had a peg to gold, you had a pie. Pretend like it's a pie, like a pizza pie. You know, you slice it in 12 slices. You pay $10 for your 12 slices, right? Well, what happens if we slice each of those slices again? Now, all of a sudden, let's say we have 16 slices or 24 slices or whatever it is that we decide to do. Well, you still only have so many dies. You print against that. Now, all of a sudden, your slice is worth less. You see what I mean? You keep slicing the same, still the same finite amount of gold, but you've printed more money against it, right?
It devalues, right. It devalues the currency.
So we don't have that issue anymore because we're no longer on a pegged arrangement. We have a free-floating fiat regime. So the difference between a peg and a free-floating fiat regime is that we're able to absorb shocks. That whether it be the international economy or the local economy, we can absorb shocks. We can make moves. We can do things where we can have some elasticity in our arrangement. Okay?
It sounds like you're saying that deficits aren't the boogeyman that people say they are.
Not at all. In fact, I want to be real clear. Deficits are extremely important when you're in an economy that is based on being a net importing nation. We are a net importing nation to the tune of roughly 500 billion annually. Okay? So if we're not deficit spending at least 500 billion plus one, we're going to be in the toilet, right? Because that's money leaving our country. That's the net leaving our country. That's not the overall leaving our country. Our overall is way higher than that. And to put another point on it, that money doesn't actually leave the country. It gets parked at the Federal Reserve. And that's when countries like China, who have a lot of our imports, they're responsible for a lot of our imports. Right. That money stays parked at the Fed. While China will sit there and increase their dollars in their own currency at home, but then they'll say, well, wait a minute, why am I leaving my money parked at the Fed not earning interest? Why don't I buy a treasury bond? Ah, there we go. And so our old days, back when we were gold standard and stuff like that, it still didn't do this, but we were sold to believe that it was funding government, that they were buying these treasury bonds to fund the government. It's bullshit. So what happens is that it's just really a savings account with a little minor interest on it, very little interest. And where do those dollars that pay for that come from? Keystrokes, nothing more. They don't dig it out of the ground. They're not going and killing a bunch of people for oil for it. It's keystrokes. It's just that simple. And this makes people's heads explode when they hear that, because, you know, they like, my precious, I've got to dig it out of the ground, you know, and it's like, nope, nope, nope.
No, it comes out of thin air. It's magic.
So,
there's nothing back.
But the deal, the real important key here is this, okay? Our nation is what we call monetarily sovereign. We have a free-floating fiat currency that is not pegged. It is in no way, shape, or form convertible to a commodity. So therefore, its only value is driven by taxation, right? The government is the monopoly issuer of the currency. Therefore, it is the price setter. And to make understanding of why that is, you have to go back to the beginning of chartalism, the beginning of the idea of minting coins or printing the king's gold, okay? And what happened was is that people in their villages and stuff like that, they would be out there fishing, You know, they'd be out there beating, you know, a rug or whatever it is that they did back in the old days, you know. And the king would say, well, I want to build a road. I want to build an aqueduct. I want to build a castle. I want to do something like that. And I don't want to make them slaves. So how do I get them off their butts doing what they want to do and get them to do what I want them to do? And here, have this coin. And the people are looking, I'm like, why do I want your coin? Who cares if it's gold? What does that mean to me? I don't care, right? So he says, you got a good point. I'm going to issue a hut tax. So I'm going to put a tax on your hut. And now if you don't pay the tax, your hut's going to be taken away from you. And oh, by the way, you have to pay that tax in my gold. Well, how do I get your gold? Well, you got to do some work for me. Oh, okay. So the guy created the gold, gave him a coin, and then he gets the coin back. It wasn't like, oh my God, the king's going to go bankrupt if he doesn't get his coins back. And neither is the United States going to go bankrupt or anything if they don't get a bunch of taxes. So when you hear these people that are really good progressives, fist in the air, you know, oh, I'm so progressive, and they're talking about how we got to raise taxes to pay for stuff. Right. They don't realize they're playing directly into a right-wing narrative that'll come back around and smack them in the mouth. That'll say, well, I don't want to pay for your bad choices. My tax dollar, I don't want it to pay for your Obama phone. I don't want it to pay for your crab meat on your food stamps. I don't want it to pay for all those bad mistakes you made smoking cigarettes and stuff. I don't want to pay for you, you lazy SOB.
Pretty much.
So now all of a sudden, you've set the stage for the constant ping pong battle, right? When reality is taxes don't fund spending. So why don't we sit there and have a kumbaya moment, tell the bigots and the idiots, hey, it's all good. You may not like us, but we know you love your kids. Let's get some single payer going. Hey, you may not love us.
I feel you. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. No,
it's all good. I mean, you get the gist.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like you're saying, for the most part, to some degree, it was a political gimmick to compel work. That's what it sounds like.
There is that component, but then the idea, think about this, right? FDR was famous for making people believing they were paying into things. Right. He made you believe you were paying into Social Security. He made everyone feel like a patriot for buying war bonds to fund the war. He made everyone, but what was he doing? Our economy was screaming at 1,000 miles an hour. We were overheating to the point where every human being in the country was employed. Kids were employed, women were employed, men were off fighting battles. There was all this stuff going on. Yeah. And so they had to cool the economy off. So how did they do that? They made people believe they were funding the war, and they got them to park their money and take it out of circulation by buying security bonds. It's another tool to bring down inflation, to ensure that the economy doesn't go berserk, and then we have like runaway inflation. And back then, because of the nature of things, people would get like nervous. They would yank their money out of the banks. You would have bank runs. You would see wild, if you look at the historical inflation rate, you'd see wild spikes of deflation and inflation, and it's just all over the map. And then all of a sudden you got, you know, we started learning what was going on, and we have not been able to make any meaningful inflation in a very, very long time. In a very, very long time. I think it was like 1982 was the last year that we saw any real meaningful inflation. And otherwise, it's been static. It's to the point where it's almost been stagnant, and we have been printing money like crazy. We've been doing all kinds of stuff, and quite frankly, it hasn't brought on the inflation. So we're still waiting for the government to go broke. 200 years worth of debt, and we aren't broke. We're still functioning. Why is that? Doesn't take a rocket scientist, but it does take people breaking away from their religion, which is being a Democrat and fighting the Republican. That's the religion. So naturally, if the Republicans say we got to cut taxes, what does a Democrat have to say? No,
it's political.
Raise taxes.
That guy's a tax and spender, and he's going to take your money to give to those other people. In which case, they're like, "Whoa, we need to lower taxes. Not just lower taxes, we also need to pay down our spending." I mean, it's bizarre. Let me ask you this. I'm pretty sure you've heard this argument, and I want to make the argument not because I believe in the argument. I think the argument is ridiculous, but I'm trying to create a delineation so people can understand it. If that's true, if deficits aren't necessarily all that important, why can't you just give everyone $1 million?
So, all right. So the real resources are what is our constraint. right?
Yeah.
So think about this. Let's play a game with something very near and dear to all of our hearts, our healthcare system, right?
Right.
So let's say arbitrarily we go beyond Medicare for all. We just say free healthcare for all of us.
Agreed.
Boom, right? So now what's going to happen? We don't have enough doctors in this country right now. We don't. We don't have enough nurses in this country right now. We don't. We don't have enough gurneys. We don't have enough x-ray machines. We don't have enough hospital beds in general. Okay? We don't have enough practitioners, nurse practitioners, and on and on and on and on and on, right? So we've got all this pent-up demand, but we've got no real resources to back it up. There's a scarcity of being able to deliver. So all of a sudden now you're going to have a demand pull. You're going to have an inflationary period of time until we're able to meet the demand. So that means there's going to be a lot of jobs suddenly heavily in demand. Lots of jobs, lots of manufacturing of beds and machines, etc. So all of a sudden, the real resources, once they kick in, you'll get to full employment. Once you hit full employment, and if we are a net importer, once you get to that point of saturation where you've overcome the deficit in terms of the trade deficit, so you're filling a bathtub. Think about it as a bathtub, right? You're filling this bathtub up to a certain spot where it needs to be. And that you got to look at sectoral balances. This is a real deep one, and I can go into it for sure. But at a high level, just know this: the economy really looks like three sectors. You've got public sector, which is the federal government. You got private sector, which is you and I, and actually the states. And you have rest of world, aka the trade deficit, other offshoring of tax dollars, savings, private savings, all that stuff. That all goes into the sectoral balances model, right? And so when you look at it, you have to ask yourself, first things first, do we have a lot of public debt? Yeah, who cares? We just have to look at that number, right? And kind of look at the other two balances. So where's our private sector debt? Well, I can tell you right now, we got $1.2 trillion worth of student loan debt. That's going. Now all of a sudden, people can't buy food. They can't go ahead and get a house. They can't buy a car. They're all of a sudden screwed because they're paying for this student debt that they've got, right?
Yeah.
And then you look at the trade deficit. And then you got to look and you got to ask yourself, well, are we employing our full complement of labor? Is everybody that wants a job have a job? If the answer is no, why not? It's not because there's not enough work out there to do. The robots haven't come yet. We got tons of work. I just showed you that with just the healthcare, right?
Yeah, right.
So all of a sudden we make college free. Now, whoa, shoot, where are we getting all these teachers from? Where are we getting all these schools from? Where are we getting all the chairs and all the chalkboards and the computers and everything else? Holy Toledo, Batman, this is a big deal, right? Anyway, point is that as you look through this stuff, it's real resources that constrain our spending. And that unemployment level, if we have unemployment, once we reach full employment, then we get to a point where we can worry about inflation. We don't have any concern whatsoever in this case because, number one, we are a net importer. And number two, we have massive unemployment and underemployment. And then think about this.
I see. That makes sense. Okay. That makes sense. You're saying that inflation is constrained just by that when you don't have enough resources to deal with a bunch of money flooding the system. That's
right.
Where people this is increases in price because you have so many people trying to buy this particular thing. You don't have
the demand for the product. It's not the dollars. Paper money doesn't cause inflation. Printing money doesn't cause inflation. Expanding the money supply doesn't cause inflation. People confuse this because that's quantity of money theory, which came from freaking Milton Friedman, the jerk, that caused neoliberalism. He's the guy that gave us neoliberalism. He really is the one that gave us a shot of monetarism that really kicked neoliberalism into high gear. Yeah. And that's something we really need to talk about here in a little bit. But as you think about this, it's never a lack of paper or too much paper. It's always, because we have a natural need to save too. Human beings like to save money. Okay. So it's not like, this money's going to go to waste. You're not going to suddenly burn it. The issue is we don't have things to buy it with. The demand's gone. Think about Christmas morning. You want to buy your Xbox One. You're sitting there waiting outside Best Buy at 2 a.m. in line, waiting for it to come out. You get in there, and all of a sudden you're one person shy. You're like, and you run to the next store. I want it, and you want it. And like somebody's like, I got one. I'll give it to you for $1,000. All right, I'll take it. You know what I'm saying? So that right there is inflation because there's not enough product on the street.
Yeah.
You don't have enough weed on the street. Guess what? Pot prices go up. Don't have enough cane on the street. All of a sudden, Coke prices go up. It just depends. I'm using these funny things because I want people to be able to relate to it.
Yeah.
It's like when the product isn't there, the price for that goes up. It's not a matter of the money being there because people have a natural need to save. People have a natural need to invest. People have a natural need to want to not live paycheck to paycheck. But we are stuck in this situation where most of us are living less than paycheck to paycheck. And that is not only cruel, but it's unwise for our economy.
Health, public health.
Absolutely.
Public health issue.
Absolutely.
You have people dying at an early age. Some people just are afraid to go to the doctor. And even among the people who aren't necessarily afraid to go to the doctor, you still have this situation where they're showing people dying based on their economic status. Like it's a little bizarre. It's like there's a like an economic friction in the country itself that just grates on the person.
Absolutely. So let me answer something you're just leading to real quickly, and I want to drop this, and then I'll let you ask me a question to follow it. So modern monetary theory doesn't have a lot of policy prescriptions. It really doesn't say you should do this or you should do that. It's agnostic because we're already using it. It's already in place today. It's not something for you and I to decide to implement. It's already there. Yeah. So what we're talking about here is that we've never, ever questioned the bombs falling across. Well, actually, you see a lot of people go, how come we can bomb the hell out of everybody, but we can't afford health care? How come? But then when we say we can do it, then you see Hillary Clinton go out there, how are you going to pay for it? Then you see the reply, how are you going to pay? You say, how are you going to pay for it? It's like easy. Congress will write a bill. You'll keystroke the dollars into deposits. Those deposits will be put into Treasury accounts. Treasury will spend those out. That's how it'll happen every time. That's it. That's how we'll pay for it. We're not going to tax it. We don't need to tax for it.
Do the deficits in that case go on just ad nauseum? And maybe this is one of those things of trying to get into the habit of looking at it differently. Is it something that's persistent?
Think of it like this. Deficit is not public sector deficits are private sector surpluses. So let's talk about the private sector surplus as opposed to deficits, right? So if taxes are deleted, how have you helped a single poor person with that, right? You haven't. What you've done is you've taken money out of the private sector, which has made it harder on you and I, all right? So when they celebrate reducing the deficit, right, what they're celebrating is reducing the private surplus. And it's just an accounting identity. Folks don't get it. It's pretty simple. Double entry accounting. You got a debit, you got a credit. Hey, man, we got a public deficit. We got a private surplus. Hey, we got a private sector deficit. We got a public sector surplus. Only difference is there's no such thing. The government neither has dollars nor doesn't have dollars. The government creates dollars. It's the wellspring from which money comes from. So it doesn't have or not have.
I see. Identity. It's we're looking at this as if it's us. Like it's like if we're looking at it as if we have a debt. If that makes sense. It's
How
not
is it going to get passed to our kids?
Government. It's this legal fiction of sorts, having a debt.
Exactly.
But from the government standpoint, it's just a booking thing. It's not a I mean, granted, if you're the caveat being you have to have control of your own money supply. If you're Alabama or if you're Greece or something like that, where you're,
perfect.
Yeah.
You're right on it. Let me tell you, what you just said was so important. So what modern monetary theory also discusses is this concept of currency issuers and currency users. It is a very foundational principle of all this stuff. So at all times, you can assess any economy by who the currency issuer is and who the currency users are. So, for example, Puerto Rico is a currency user. The currency issuer is the United States federal government. The island of Puerto Rico is a net importer. They do not have a whole lot going on down there other than tourism, maybe some bananas, whatever else, local agriculture, whatever. They don't really make a lot in Puerto Rico.
Right.
So when their money leaves the island, you know, when they buy things and stuff, and they have to leverage themselves and they have to go into debt, they have to borrow, excuse me, they have to invest, they have to do whatever. That island nation is always on very, very scary ground. You mentioned Greece. Let me tell you the very important factors about Greece. Greece used to be monetarily sovereign. They were on their own currency called the drachma.
Yeah.
They left their own sovereignty and they joined the Eurozone and they took on the euro. Well, now they no longer have control over their own currency. Now they are a currency user. But see, these folks bought into the same neoliberal narrative and they didn't realize, what the hell does Greece actually export? Greece is a bona fide net importer. They don't have control of their currency. So is it any wonder they're belly up? Their money's leaving the country. They have no industry whatsoever to supplement it. And they have no control over making money to spend into public purpose spending. So they are screwbarred until they go back on the drachma. And they will be a case study for every other nation to understand. When people say, what do you want us to be like Greece? You know you're in the presence of a non-literate person. A person
I hate those arguments.
That is
literally, absolutely,
literally wasting your
it's
time.
Like we're going to go belly up like Greece or like what is it, Weimar?
Weimar and Zimbabwe, and so let's talk about that for a second because that's one of my favorites, right? So you got these people, they think they're really clever. They throw 1922 at you. They say, hey, what about the Weimar Republic? You know, they just printed money. It's like, no, let's talk about this for a second. So going back in World War I, Germany was crushed.
Yeah,
and they were beaten, and they went to the Treaty of Versailles, where they had massive debt put on them in foreign denominated currency, French francs. The United States debt, who is it denominated to? Is it denominated in yen, renminbi, and whatever, the yuan, the this? No, it's denominated in U.S. dollars. Where do U.S. dollars come from? These people drive me crazy when they say that. That's right. But so Weimar, okay, was in debt in French francs. They had no productive capacity. If you go back to me talking about real resources, their whole everything had been decimated. So you could have a wheelbarrow full of Reichsmarks, okay, barrel full of these things, and you couldn't buy a loaf of bread. You couldn't buy a bag of flour because there was so much competition for that kernel of corn. You know what I mean? For that little teeny bar of soap. Whatever it was, there was no means of production. They had lost everything. Now let's go to an African nation in Zimbabwe, okay? What you have there was Mugabe went ahead and took all the farmland from the white farmers, all the farmers that were actually knowledgeable about farming the land. And in a sort of bold move, he gave the land to people that didn't know how to farm, okay? So all of a sudden, the fields were no longer valuable. They were no longer being farmed properly. They had no crops. They had no nothing. Now, all of a sudden, you could have barrelfuls of money, but you had nothing. You couldn't meet the demand. So all of a sudden, you had yet again another hyperinflation. Hyperinflations happen for political reasons, not for printing money. So when you hear people say that, once again, you know you're in the room with a person that literally hasn't got a clue about economics.
No, I feel you. I assume that when I hear that argument, I got to be honest, even before hitting MMT, there is a difference between a country that issues its own currency and one that does not. Yeah, you're right. Let me ask you this. I have two questions. One has to do with the way we, how can I say this? So how does MMT get you to, for example, in one of your lectures, I heard you have this conversation about a Green New Deal, where you're talking about essentially saying, you know, people forever questioning, hey, how are you going to pay for that? Be like, wait a minute, you spend $1 trillion on military. I get that, but how are you going to pay for the stuff that you care about? It doesn't necessarily matter. How are you going to get that? I guess what I'm asking is, how does the politics lend itself to you using that money to pay for things that you yourself care about? Aren't you still in this kind of ideological struggle of sorts, even beyond the example? You made the example before about George Bush, saying George Bush essentially said, we're going to spend a ton of money and we're going to give you guys a tax cut to boot. Where is he getting that money from to do that? like implicit in him doing that is this kind of idea of MMT to some degree. I'm saying, how do you get that converted over to MMT for the things that we as progressives care about or leftists care about?
So think about this, right? We got to go back to the Nixon era once again. Oh. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, was brought into existence on Nixon's watch. Do you think Richard Nixon wanted to bring the EPA into existence?
No.
No, he did not. Richard Nixon despised us lefties. He despised us deadheads. He despised all of us socialists. He despised all of us people that wanted this stuff. He hated us. Thought we were a bunch of friggin' losers, okay? But the people demanded it, and they really demanded it. I mean, they really, really, really demanded it. They took to the streets. People really meant it when they did it. And you know what? These things came to be even in spite of his desire not for them to happen, okay? What has happened here is this, and this is the most important thing you will hear tonight, in my opinion. Progressives have always marched in place. They've always pumped their fist, and they've always been in place, and they've never gotten anywhere because they could never answer the question, how are you going to pay for it?
Yeah.
Okay? So Republicans have the Norquist Pledge. The Norquist Pledge says, we will not raise a nickel of taxes, guys, or we'll get primaried. So you can count on Republicans saying not only no, but hell no to actually raising taxes. So that means that you've got to find a way to bridge that divide, because Republicans has been kicking our ass. There's over 1,000 seats of all levels of government over the last decade that have been lost to Republicans. And there's a reason for that, because Democrats haven't made any sense.
No,
the gerrymandering has been bad, but the thing is, they're like, look, at least Republicans are the hateful sons of bitches they portray themselves to be. Democrats will kiss you while they shove a knife in your back.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Agreed.
And so people have no respect for that. They at least respect the devil that screws you hard, just the way he said he was going to. No, didn't pull any punches. He did it.
No, I agree.
So when you think about this, I'm a former Republican, so I speak fluent right wing. And so when I go into these areas, right, you know, I understand. I'm like, listen, you don't want people that are screwing around to get over on the system. You don't like corruption. You want to see honorable people respect. You want honor and integrity and blah, blah, blah. That doesn't mean they do it. It's just what is wired into their brain. Yeah. They want these things accommodated for. And when somebody is a failure and somebody's screwing around, they want them to suffer, unfortunately, or they don't want them to get benefits. I say suffer. They want to be able to wag their finger and say, by your fruits you are known, and stuff like that, you know? So I think it's important to understand the mindset of a Republican, right? Yeah. And the mindset of a Democrat, right? Democrats are pretty damn conservative. Go down south sometime. Talk to a Dixiecrat. Talk to African Americans even in the South. You're going to find they're a heck of a lot more conservative than us progressives think they are. And this is a pretty standard flow as you watch that lower quadrant of the country, that lower half. Those people are very, very conservative. And it's time tested. There's a lot of different traditions. You know, you got the heavy influence of the church. You've got all these things. So you've got to realize that when you're appealing to them, you can't appeal to them the same way you would appeal to a progressive. There's a different language. There's different factors there. And so I know for a fact that Democrats and Republicans and Libertarians and Greens and everybody else love their children. They all love their kids, okay? What they don't want to do is they don't want to pay for your mistakes. So when you take the stigma away, say, guys, we're not talking about welfare anymore. We're talking about citizens' benefits. Yeah. And guys, we're not talking about, you know, doing this as, you know, your taxes paying for it. We're talking about these are our national treasures, our national assets that we're deploying for the public purpose. You know, the government is there to serve the general welfare, not welfare, or not for the people that, you know, just are so screwed up, here's a nickel. We're talking about the general welfare to make our country better. And so when you think about it, why not make healthcare a right of citizenship? Why not make free college a right of citizenship? This appeals to nationalistic people as well, right? They like the idea of our country being better than others. They like that. They don't want to see that some ethnic minority or some gender minority or some other person gets a leg up because, my God, we're all equal. I don't see color. Blah, blah, blah. You know, all the nonsense, right? But that's what you got to deal with. That is genuinely what you got to deal with. So once you speak what they speak, you can bridge the divide and you can demonstrate to them that our progressive agenda is not some crazy Stalinistic, hiya, we're talking about something that they can love and adore too. Something that they don't have to, and they don't want their taxes going up, and we can say, don't worry, buddy, don't worry. The only thing we will do, we want to replace a budgetary constraint with an inflation constraint. And we want to look at full employment. So how do you do that? With a federal job guarantee. Okay? So federal job guarantee, I used to struggle with this because I used to be a real big basic income guy.
I'm in camp of both.
I see the advantage, but I'll explain to you. And trust me, these are all policies that somebody will have to come up with in very, very fine form. Okay? Yeah. But they're more conceptual right now in terms of, because, there's a bunch of different ways to slice this pie, right? Yeah. Conservative MMTers that think that the job guarantee should just sort of be a bare bones, bottom level, low skill, living wage type job, like $20 an hour kind of job. More progressive folks like myself would like to see this be a much more robust public purpose type wage, like in the local communities, not the federal government making work for the man, capitalism, right? We're talking about the public purpose. So in other words, your local community sitting down at a table saying, what kind of work is not profitable, but would make our community better? What could we do that would be better? Hey, why not have people that sit down with the elderly and play checkers with them all day? Why not have people that sit there and teach music class 7 days a week instead of once every 3 weeks? Why not have gym class back in the schools every day? Why not have every kind of after school program free again? Why not bring about all these public purpose things with art and bringing back music and really making it a beautiful place to be once again? You know what I'm saying? We have forsaken the public purpose, and we have gotten down to where, well, we can't afford football for the kids anymore. We can't afford hockey. We can't afford music. We can't afford the trombone. We can't afford snare. Oh my God, we got to get rid of the marching band. Oh my God, we got to get rid of this. Hey, well, only the wealthy kids can play hockey because God, so you see what I'm saying? When you look at what we could do, and I just threw out some things that were off the top of my head. The well is as deep as your imagination goes, because we just have to think, what would enhance our local communities? What would enhance your local, and think about this. I wish I was black so I could make this statement and have it really, really hold the kind of effect that I feel when I think it, right?
Go for it.
So tell me if you feel this, man. I love to think about the empowerment of a black community that has been downtrodden and has been literally left to freaking die and rot. Like think Flint, Michigan, that all the businesses left and they're trapped. They got no income coming in. They've got alternative economies, drugs, and whatever it is that they can do to survive. You know what I mean? Now all of a sudden enter in the federal job guarantee. Now these people can say, you know what? You fix our fucking water. Excuse my friend. You fix our water.
You're fine.
Or we're leaving. We're gone. We're outie. We're gone. You know what? Watch me pick this thing up and head on down there to Colorado where the weed is going on. I can go there and I can get a job tomorrow morning immediately because there's a guaranteed job waiting for me. There is no more trapped. There is no more trapped. You are now immediate mobility, and you have a living wage with living benefits, and your life, the entire economy is now pegged to labor. So guess what? The private sector, they want to hire you. Yeah. Guess what? They got to meet or beat the job guarantee now. You have just set the wage floor. You have set the benefits floor. Now a company cannot hire you if they don't beat that damn wage. They don't beat that benefits package.
Agreed. I look, I've made the same argument. I have made the same argument.
It's beautiful, man.
Yeah. You think of all the things that need to be done in the country. All the things, this quote unquote shiny city on the hill. I would go further. I would say infrastructure. I would say if you're talking about high-speed rail, maglevs, I would say automation. Automation. Like put in infrastructure in place that would allow processes to be automated so people can work less. I think this is why I'm on. No, go for it.
No, okay, so think about this, right? Basic income is by its definition inflationary. Because what was it that I told you that caused inflation? Not having enough product to meet demand, not too much money in the economy, not having enough output. What is the productive output of somebody getting a basic income? Nothing.
No, that's yes and no. I feel you on this. Oh man, I don't want to get into debate on it.
No, it's
agree with
okay
you.
because I like the job guarantee bit. But here's what I'm saying, right? So you remember during Bernie's campaign, they talked about expanding Social Security, right?
Right.
So you think about this, Social Security, people still think Social Security's in trouble. They want to raise FICA taxes. Why? They're deleted because you've been buying the lie that you've been paying into. You get the statement. How did they get a statement if they're not using my money? I don't know. Wow. You know, I got a statement. It says I paid into it. There's a piggy bank with crumpled up old dollar bills over there, right? Wrong. Of course not. They keystroke those checks just like they keystroke every other dollar spent into existence. Every single dollar is a brand new dollar. They don't spend used dollars. They spend new ones into that because they make deposits, keystroke deposits into accounts, and bam, right? Yeah. So when you think about a basic income, there are people that cannot work in the normal sense that you're thinking of today, right? Right. So when you say work less, what you're really referring to is our typical job today where we work for the man. I'm talking about redefining what work is. Exactly. Right? We're not talking about the man. We're talking about public purpose. There's 33 dimensions of the public purpose by my friend and partner, Dr. Joe Firestone. He wrote a phenomenal article on the 33 dimensions of the public purpose. Yeah. And for those of you who watch Real Progressives, Joe has a show on Saturday nights. He's a professor. He's teaching, right? Really what we come down to is that we have forsaken so much of what the public purpose is that we just think that naturally robots are coming in and will automate everything. And it's like people genuinely want to work. Most people. I'm not saying they want to kill themselves. Most people really want to work. And when you redefine what work is, instead of seeing it through Eugene V. Debs' manufacturing lens, and you start looking at it differently, right? Now think about it. Remember this. We want to have Medicare for all. How many doctors, how many nurses, how many orderlies? We got a lot of work there. We want to have free college for all. How many teachers, how many aides, how many administrators? Got a lot of work there, right? Groundskeepers, whatever, right? Then you look at this. I happen to work in an industry that focuses on roadways and bridges in my real life. And so you look at it, bridges across America are like D-rated. You take your life into your own hands every time you cross a bridge in America, okay? And so when you think about this, you ask yourself, well, wait a minute. Why aren't we investing in that? So it's going to take underwater welders. It's going to take lots of blue-collar construction. And we're talking about life cycle management here. We're not just talking about one and done. I mean, that bridge is going to need, you have a rotating need for rehabbing these bridges. And the states right now are starved for cash. Starved for cash. So states like Pennsylvania have a $600 million shortfall this year. Where do you think the money comes from? I told you already, but it's the government, federal government, right? It doesn't come from rich people. It doesn't come from big business. The government spends it into existence and then it's moved around the economy. When that money leaves the economy, it starts drying up. We have a budget surplus a la Bill Clinton. All of a sudden, we go into recession. We're about to hit another recession, Jamal. And so what has to happen is these things that we're talking about now, that spending has to occur and a boom of employment is going to take place. And all the automation in the world, you're talking about twisting ties on a Tootsie Pop kind of automation mostly. I'm talking about...
No. But go ahead. Go for it.
There's a funny meme. My another partner of mine, Ellis Winningham, has this meme where he's got Captain Kirk going like this and Darth Vader leaning over. He goes, all this automation and yet we're still working. It's beautiful, right? And so you think about it, it's like, if I tell you that you could have a basic income sitting at home taking care of your kids, if that's what the community values, values, right? Then so be it. Or if you go to a community center where moms that have decided that they would like to raise their kid, They go there, they take their kid there, and all the other moms go there, and they raise other people's kids that are going, whatever. It takes a village, right? There's all kinds of ways of looking at this that automation will never, ever, ever touch. And it brings people back together again. All of a sudden,
I'm sorry, that part I agree.
No, you're good. I'm just letting you know how it flows, man.
No, I agree. I agree. I guess what I'm, and that was my fault. I shouldn't have interrupted. You're right. I'm not talking about the jobs that are twisting pudding pops. That's exactly what I'm talking. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I think you have certain human element jobs that aren't going anywhere. People, look, a person who wants to be a doctor is always going to want to be a doctor. And there will always be a job for that guy who wants to be a doctor or a welder or whatever. I agree. I totally agree.
And the basic income, think about the people that are handicapped or handicapable or however differently abled, whatever the term is these days, and that they would like to be able to do something. Maybe they would like to be a writer. Yeah. Maybe they want to help edit documents that they could do from their own home. And it's public purpose work. I don't know. What I mean? Bottom line is whatever the community decides. But let's just say hypothetically, somebody can't work or genuinely doesn't want to work, because we're talking about a voluntary program. We're not talking about bringing about, the Battle of Stalingrad, bringing back, the Russian Revolution here. We're not talking about that. Right. Trotsky's here. We're talking about, people being able to work if they want to. Nobody that wants a job will be without a job is the point, right?
Correct.
And so I don't want a job. Jamar, I don't want a job. I want to sit at home and I want to play video games. It's not really my cup of tea, man. It's not really something I'm really into, compensating for. But the flip side of that is this, right? I don't want them dying either, if that's who they are and that's what they are, right? So I could see expanding Social Security to accommodate these kinds of cases, okay? Which would in essence be a basic income. The difference is I don't want that basic income to be a universal basic income. I want it to be an opt-in or an opt-out, because you want to have a differentiation between productive work for the community, because you want people, you're trying to incentivize people to be a part of their community. You're trying to incentivize people to enhance their community. If you don't want to enhance your community and you just want to be a couch potato, you don't have to die for that. So here, we'll give you some expanded Social Security. So I will buy that. I'm okay with that, right? But I think the average person, I think the idea here is to eradicate involuntary unemployment. And I think conservatives, if you think about conservatives, they don't like people picking up $1 for free, right? So they like people working hard, right? Well, what if we redefine work, but yet we still get them to, it's like, hey, man, they're working, but what more do you want from them, right? We gave them a job and they're doing what they're cleaning the toilets at the church. Whatever it is, you all decide. Not for me to decide, right? So anyway, I think that the underpinning of the economy, once you have full employment, remember what I said about inflation, right? Once you get full employment, now you start entering into potentially inflationary things. Still got to look at your sectoral balances. Are we a net importer or a net exporter? And then on top of that, are we okay? We flash for a second. You got to look at the sectoral balances, net importer, net exporter. And then after you do that, you got to make some decisions about, okay, do we have to slow the economy? Maybe we do raise a little taxes. Maybe we do some selling of bonds or something like that. But I think before we get there, I want to raise the point of the national debt, because that is one of the biggest things you hear people talk about, right? We talked about it in the very beginning. China decides they want to take the money that they have, earned in buying or selling us goods and service. They want to invest that in the treasury bonds. Why does the Fed and the Treasury sell these things to begin with, right? Why do they have these monetary debt instruments to sell? And we already talked about, because we want to extract money from the economy so that the economy doesn't overheat, right? So these are tools that they do to check a positive interest rate at the Fed, which is bank loans, right? We're talking about bank credit now. Monetary policy, the Federal Reserve. Fiscal policy, Congress. Congress creates net financial assets. Over here with the Fed, all they do is shift chairs around on the Titanic, okay? They move things, they make things liquid, they sell things, they do things, they play games with elasticity, they raise interest rates, whatever it takes to keep things where they are.
Right.
A lot of those things that they do are anachronisms from the gold standard. They're old school logic. And what a treasury is basically a basic income for these countries or for large corporations or whoever buys these things, because, you know, government checks don't bounce. So here you've got this thing, and it's going to automatically,
yeah.
Bingo. So the way to get rid of this, you got some people that want to do away with bank credit altogether. They want to end the Fed. I call them end the Fed-ish. You've got all these people that have these ideas, you know, the creature from Jekyll Isle, the this, the that. Reality is that if we put a permanent zero interest rate policy, or ZIRP, in effect, you wouldn't have to sell treasuries anymore. You wouldn't have to sell any of that stuff to defend a positive interest rate, because the natural interest of money is always zero. So if you have it at zero, then you don't have to worry about a positive interest rate. Now, all of a sudden, you don't have to worry about the debt anymore. And the debt will be a self-healing problem, because the debt is really not debt. It's really our national assets. Because what happens if China takes its trillions of dollars of US dollars and wants to spend them? You think you're going to spend trillions of US dollars in Libya? No. They got to spend trillions of dollars in the United States. So what happens when people spend money? What happens to the economy? It goes, right? So what we're talking about here is our net assets. The debt is the sum total of every untaxed dollar since the dawn of time, okay? And so when you think about it, there's been 7 times we've tried to pay off the debt. I don't have the dates in front of me, but I got a great meme for it I can show you sometime. And of those 7 times, every single time within a year, we have gone into a massive depression or a ginormous recession. Every single time, because the bathtub is always the bathtub. And so if you drain the bathtub, the economy goes into recession. It'll always be that way. It doesn't matter what your thought process is. So this is a big deal, because when people talk about the debt, we got to reduce the debt. Well, the debt, once you stop selling these treasury bonds and stuff, these folks are going to eventually end up cashing them out, spending them, doing whatever. And people say, well, what about the petrodollar? What about this? What about that? They got all these external things that they worry about, right? Well, the reality is, because we have a free-floating, sovereign, non-convertible currency, we have the flexibility to react, spend money when we need to, pull money out when we need to. We can make these moves. But right now, we're like paralyzed children that don't understand what we've got. And we freak out about words that just don't make sense and numbers that are really big, because we don't understand what a big number is. Well, when you have a spreadsheet and you key in a bunch of numbers, you don't go, ah! But that's what our debt is. It's a bunch of keystrokes on a spreadsheet. We don't need that stuff. It doesn't matter. You know, so these folks, this debt is just a bunch of gibberish. They spend it back into the economy. The economy goes boom. We have to find other things like raising taxes at that point to lower the inflationary situation that would occur from having us chasing too few goods with too many, you know, too much demand with too few. Yeah. So anyway, the debt is a joke. Anybody that says that, ignore them immediately. They're lying.
It's a hard political thing to get past, man.
Well, I am determined.
My mom knows squat about politics. One thing she does, or the very least she believes that she knows, or most people, it just random people. You throw a rock, they couldn't tell you squat about who's in office. They couldn't tell you squat about what's going on in politics. They would say, well, you can't do that because you're going to create inflation. It's like, it's hardwired.
But you've got a good point here, Jamal. This is important stuff. What you're saying is this: everybody views the federal government that creates its own currency as a household budget, as household finances. That's what they think.
I mean, that is the logic that but you can understand it. Politicians were having this thing, Republicans, this kitchen table, you know, it's like, hey, when you guys are at your kitchen table, you guys are talking about, you know, the bills needing to be paid, comparing that to essentially the federal government. I've heard people who I used to work with, who were normal circumstances, relatively bright people, would make the same thing. Well, I mean, I pay my debts. The government should have to pay its debts also. as if those two things are exactly the same thing.
Well, the government always does pay its debts, right? And this is the thing.
Yeah.
People don't understand. We pay our debts because we have to. The Constitution says we have to, okay?
Yes.
And so when you think about this, it really becomes a funny thing because, like, the Fed is operated as nonprofit. It is not a profitable enterprise. So what happens is that they cover their expenses, whatever those are, and then what they do is they take the rest of the money and they give it back to the Treasury. Okay, so when you think about this, I think it was 2015, the Fed gave 97 billion back to the Treasury. Does that sound like we owe the Fed? I mean, this is the moronic shit that comes out of people's mouths. Oh, the Fed owns us. Well, then why the hell did they just give us $97 billion? If they just shut up, Oh my God, just stop. And this is when I lose my mind, because it should be so easy. Now, I understand people. My mom, she's almost 80 years old. She's a lifelong Republican. She voted for Trump, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And I sit there and I talk to her, and she's like, look, Stephen, I'm an old woman. I just want to enjoy my last years. I said, don't worry, Mom. I'll fight this battle for you. But the reality is that there's a lot of these people out there that take it very seriously about the debt and deficits and all this crap, because it was drilled into their head from FDR and every other president. Well, we're here to disrupt the apple cart, because this isn't a theory. This is the thing that cracks me up. When you think about what a theory is, general theory, general relativity, you think about gravitational pull, and you think, wow, maybe I can jump out a window because gravity and all that stuff is just a phenomenon or a theory, right? And you go, wow, really? Okay, so maybe that's not such a good thing to say, right? We're not just kicking it at the bar. I got a theory about why the Redskins stink. We're talking about, this is a observable, repeatable fact. Given these surrounding things, it's basically a law. But because we recognize that there could be more information available to us, and there could be further studies going on, maybe we go ahead and expand. For example, let's say hypothetically the United States changes a law, because all money is legally driven. Everything about our money supply is legal, right? We write a new law, guess what? It changes the parameters. Now, all of a sudden, modern monetary theory will describe the currency and the system as it is under the new thing, right? So that's why it's a theory. It's not because it's debatable, right? It's because right here, right now, we've got this system, and it's set up like this. And this is the way it works. And the reason why they can bomb with impunity is because there is no constraints. The reason why we think we're having to, oh my God, we'll go Weimar Republic if we give us single payer health care, is because we've been brainwashed into believing that. Instead, and one final major point that I want to make for all people to listen to, and I get in so much trouble because people just don't have a brain for economics, especially from lefties. Okay, my people hate me when I say this, but the reality is, once you understand what I'm saying, it means you don't have to start looking for dollars, meaning you don't have to cut something to pay for something.
Right.
So the proclivity of the left is to cut the military budget in half, right? You hear that a lot. We need to slash the military budget in half. Well, they were very strategic in how they devised the military, right? So what they did was they set up a bolt manufacturing company in Massachusetts, a screw manufacturing thing in San Diego. Then they went ahead and created a washer manufacturing thing in Seattle, Washington. And then they went ahead and picked a rug company up in Wisconsin. And then they went ahead and picked a leather company for the chairs down there in Texas. And they spread the distribution out throughout the states. So now what happens? If you cut anything, every state hurts. So what happens when you tell your constituents, hey, we got to close that base down, and all you people that had jobs there are no longer employed? Now what happens, right? And remember the bathtub analogy. The bathtub, the economy doesn't know where the money's spent. It just knows that it's spent. Mm-hmm. So that money is in the bathtub. If you cut the military budget in half, you've gone ahead into the bathtub and you've gone, it doesn't matter whether you like what the spending was on, you just cut it in half. So I tell people, rather than saying cut spending, let's talk about shifting our priorities. Okay, so you want to always increase the overall spend because you want a deficit spend because you need that pool, that tub filled because you've got the exports and all the other stuff going on. You always got to keep these factors in mind as you're laying this out. Yeah. So let's say we say, okay, we're going to reduce military spending by 50%. That means we've got to spend even more money somewhere else. So while we cut that, we didn't need to cut that, right? It's not an either or trade. So what happens is, and this is why we lose, why we always fail, okay? We tie trying to get X with cutting something in Y when they are completely unrelated. Cutting Y is a priority because it's a moral imperative, not because we need to find money. You see what I mean? Do it for the right reason. The reason we're doing this is because we don't want to kill people anymore.
Right.
We're done bombing people. We don't want to kill any more people. That's not our goal, right? So that's a good, noble reason to change the way our military-industrial complex looks and feels and is funded. Now, the flip side on that, on the other side of the coin is that those expenditures are all human jobs. They're families, your neighbors. We're not talking about some nefarious Rothschild or some Soros or some this or that. We're talking about Johnny up the street. So in order to make people whole, we've got to think this through. It's not just good enough to say, well, I want to slash this and I want to slash that and I want to spend here and spend there. You got to think. And we lefties don't have a good mind for thinking through problems. We just react. We just react. Our fist goes up. We start saying things. We start patting each other on the back, and all of a sudden we get excited. And it doesn't matter if we're running headfirst into a wall. For example, California single payer.
Correct.
California is a currency user. California's a currency user. What happens if they have a bunch of people with an outbreak? Where's the money coming from? Oh, snap. They can't print their own money. They can't create their own money. So guess what? The federal government needs to do it. So what happens to the other 49 states that wanted to have single payer, but now they got the conservatives saying, see, it failed in California. Well, why did it fail in California? Because they're not a currency issue, you knucklehead. Not you, but, you know, proverbial. And so you look at this and you say to yourself, well, wow, we just made a great case with the 14th Amendment to make sure everybody gets equal coverage. It needs to be federal, and it needs to be done as single payer for all, Medicare for all, and it could be even more than that. Could just be free health care for all.
Yeah.
Keystroke the payments. It doesn't matter. The payments expand the economy. We're okay. We just need to make sure that people, when they say we're going to cut the military budget, that they understand that that is not just, we're not just stopping killing. They've used the military as a job guarantee. They've used the military as the employer of last resort. They've used the military for their entire social training. They've used it to get education to people. They've used it for poor African Americans. Hey, trade your life and get a GI Bill. Yeah. So you see a disproportionate number of African Americans and Hispanics and others that join the military. Why? Because they haven't been given access to other opportunities. So now they get to trade their lives for a job, for a college thing, for, you know, whatever. And this has got to end. And so that's where the federal job guarantee comes in also, right? Yeah. Job training, friggin' free college, single payer, dental, vision, you know, all that shit, you know. And we need to start thinking big and bold as progressives. And this is what Bernie Sanders brought to the table, even though he wasn't as clear in his messaging because he purposely had to dance that line because he was already being told he was pie in the sky.
Politics,
you know?
Yeah. No, there's a politics.
So
yeah.
It's up to you and I to elevate this to them. We, in fact, in talking with Stephanie Kelton directly, she told me offline, she was like, Steve, she goes, you know, there's thousands of economists in the world. You know, I'm one of a few that has a position that I can sit here. She goes, I have to play in certain rules because that's the way the game of economics is. People, once they step out, are excommunicated. You look in Australia, people in Australia have the same monetary thing as we do. UK, Japan, all of them, they all have the same thing. And I know all these economists that know this stuff too. And they say point blank, the minute you step out and go heterodox instead of orthodox, you take your career into your own hands. And you probably won't land a teaching career. You probably won't land a job in government So it's up to activists, it's up to the grassroots to cram this thing through and drive it through pitchforks, torches, and say, hell no, we are not letting you lie to us anymore. Our lives are worth more than your bullshit. And mean it, mean it, mean it, mean it.
No,
that's the deal, man.
Yeah, dude, that is that's perfect. It's funny, when you were talking about the military, I was thinking to myself, I was like, oh man, I hope he's not coming out for the military budget. No, I understand what you're saying. It's not just killing people, it's jobs. It's a jobs program, whether people realize it or not. It's a jobs program. It's like every jet that person buys, every bomb that person buys, every person that goes to school and gets, you know, like the GI Bill, whatever. All those things are opportunities for things that people to exceed. The problem is they're exceeding using this industry that murders people abroad.
Yes. Look, we've got to shift that production to other things. We've got to shift that work to other places. And we've got so much stuff. Do you realize that the military could come home? And there's laws that say they can't do this, ironically. But there's things that they could do here at home to take over cleaning up bad rivers. Yeah. To do all the things they do abroad. They're literally legally not allowed to do it here. And I think it's something about being a conquering army. There's some law, and I'll be terribly honest, I don't know what it is, but I know that a
little bit. The NDAA allows them to operate on U.S. soil, providing in cases of emergency. But under normal circumstances, no, they're not supposed to come here and start doing stuff.
So we've got to find a way to shift that money away from there, but we've got to expand the spending and blow it up on domestic stuff. And you know, I am a anti-war left-wing guy, but I also respect the fact that our nation does need to protect itself, and we do need to be able to have a good standing army, and we do need to be able to be a player in the world. To what degree, I don't like the way we've done it. We've gone so militaristic, we've become such war hawks that our entire mission is basically patrolling the globe, dropping bombs, and that is our means of production. Hey, we need more bombs. We dropped some more over in Libya and Yemen and whatever. Okay, we'll get it cranking. More jobs, guys.
Buy more bombs for more jobs.
That's it. It's terrible. And so we've got to change that.
Are you open for questions?
I am, but I want to say one more thing before we go.
Go for it.
We have friends up in Flint, Michigan. We had friends at the Dakota Pipeline. We have friends at all these pipelines. And this is the problem with left-wing politics. We're all orphans. We have this little orphan Annie over here. We got this little orphan Annie over there. And none of them know how to pay for the solutions. They're blocking. They're camped out. They got good fires. They got great acoustic music at the fire. They're roasting marshmallows. Their fists are in the air. But the reality is that we need green energy, right? Yeah. We need to be able to go to Congress and say, now. And so the answer goes beyond the protests. It goes beyond, and the problem is that most of them don't have an interest in economics, don't know economics, and they're not going to do it. So they go halfway, and they're just a nuisance, but they're not actually doing anything to shift it. So it's up to people that understand this stuff to fight tooth and nail to occupy congressmen's offices, to occupy their town halls, to occupy the media, and to go anywhere they can to tell them we can afford it. You do it now, or we're going to be out here with pitchforks and torches, man. You're not going to like it. You better answer to us.
Yes. The pitchforks or dollars. There are no pitchforks.
That's right.
Pitchfork or dollars. Either those guys are being compelled based upon who's paying them, or those guys are compelled on who's out there in office knocking on their door saying, hey, I need you guys to do this.
That's right. So yes, I'm open for questions.
Very cool. So let's see. My wife, the loving woman that she are, wrote down a few questions. But guys, if you guys have any questions for Steve, definitely share them. We're going to get a few in. So someone named, this is funny. Someone named None Your Business. Oh, that's awesome.
Oh,
how can we encourage the distribution of wealth within our respective smaller worlds? How do you get your boss to give us raises and in turn become... Wait. Let me read this one more time. How can we encourage the distribution of wealth within our smaller circles? I don't quite understand what that one. It says, how do we get bosses to give us raises and in turn improve productivity? I think what he's trying to say is, how do you get a private sector, for the most part, who's based purely on this idea of profit. I need to maximize my profit. How do you get those guys to give?
So let's talk about that. So back in the 70s, Milton Friedman came up with this idea, and I'm going to say this in shorthand, so this is not the deep dive that somebody might want me to go. I keep getting that crap from these, the super highbrow folks. But the reality is that what they did was they said, hey, man, no more spending on the fiscal side. When we have problems, people are going to have to take on debt. They're going to have to take on private debt to survive the downturns, and then they'll pay off the private debt during the upturns, right? So since the 70s, you've seen this income inequality go like this. Wages have stagnated. Our wages have stagnated. We've gotten next to no raises at all, while the rich have gotten very ridiculously rich.
Yeah.
Now, there's several reasons for that, but the primary one that I'm focused on is the fact that you and I have had to pay $10 for a loaf of bread because we bought it on a credit card and we couldn't pay it off that month, so we now paid interest and compounding interest, etc. Okay?
Right.
We got laid off. We couldn't pay our mortgage, so we missed 3 payments. Now, instead of just being 3 payments behind, we've got penalties too. Okay?
Yeah.
So you keep building this up. It's expensive to be poor. Okay? So what's happened is that you've seen our wages not only have stagnated, but our cost of living has raised. And it's because of the interest that we pay on our own student debt, our own personal debt, our credit card debt that we use to bypass those short-term hits. Well, what we need to do is we need to get back to this job guarantee, and we need to get back to paying money, spending money into the economy at the low end, because money has a natural helium effect and pools at the top, right? So if you're not constantly infusing money at the bottom through a job guarantee program and through expanded Social Security, Medicare for all, and all these other things, if you're not doing that, then all of a sudden money pools at the top, and then all of a sudden you're like, dear sir, please, could you perchance spare a dollar? And the reality is that's bad. So the more we spend on the regular people down here at the bottom through this deficit spending and these programs, this robust New Deal America, the Green New Deal, the Bernie Sanders New Deal, etc., all that spending went to the 99%. All that spending went down at the regular common man.
Yeah.
Okay. And so now what have you done? You have directly impacted Wall Street because they are no longer getting interest on things. You've affected the banks because they're no longer getting interest on things. You've affected these friggin' payday lenders because they're no longer grabbing you by the short hairs. Okay. So now all of a sudden you're able to spend money into the economy. So guess what? Now all of a sudden there's increased demand with the ability to pay. So what do the employers do now that suddenly people can actually buy their products? Now all of a sudden they're competing for labor again. They weren't competing for labor before. Now it's like begging, please, sir, let me scrub your toilets. Man, all of a sudden you take everybody and put them on a job guarantee. There's some people that are just going to be really, really happy doing nothing but working in the local community. But the other jobs are going to free up for the people that are wanting to do other things, right? And so you're going to see an increase in wages. You're going to see demand go. You're going to see competition again for you and I. And all of a sudden labor will have power again. And that's even without unionizing. You unionize, and man, oh man, all of a sudden you've gotten even more of an explosion, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is that what this person's asking is a very important thing when it comes to income inequality. We need to redistribute GDP, and that comes by way of starting with the federal job guarantee. And there's a host of other things. I mean, obviously, you should soak the rich at some point. But our concern has always been, let's solve the misery first. Let's help the people live. You know, we haven't touched on this, but I think it's fair to say we've got some environmental crises going on right now.
Hell yeah, yeah.
Huge chunk of ice just broke off in Antarctica. Okay, that didn't happen because it was cold. It happened because things are warming and you got methane coming in. You got all these problems coming in. So when you think about it, if you think we just got forever and a day to play around and worry about deficits, hey, I'm worried about the debt, man. Dude, I'm worried about the debt as the tsunami's coming. You're like, what's that wall of water right there? Oh, that's your death, mofo. But what about the debt?
That's the most aggravating argument I think I've run into. Because I make this point, we have real realities that we deal with. The environment is a real reality. Your ability to live, your social needs are real realities. When those things aren't necessarily being met, you have actual calamities. You have things that actually adversely affect people in your society and your environment. If they're talking about global, ecological collapse, like one thing
Yes.
after another. Where you're talking about deforestation, you're talking about deoxygenation of the water. Climate
Yes.
is one issue after the next. You know, it's funny. This is a slight tangent. Part of my reason for voting for Jill Stein and for believing that Hillary Clinton was the worst option was for this particular reason. It boiled down to you have actual real realities that you have to deal with. And are we going to keep this illusion going as if, you know, the neo-lib is making us feel better because she doesn't have this manner like Trump? It's like she's still doing pretty bad things in regards to
same shit.
Yeah.
Same exact. And you know, it's interesting you say that. Hillary Clinton promised to bring Bill Clinton's economy back.
Strategy. Yeah. That's right.
And I was like screaming at the TV. I'm grabbing my screen. No, you know, no.
We need more deregulation of Wall Street. Yeah, we need more of that.
The vote blue sycophants are like deep throating this idea. Yes, yes, let's do it. And I'm like, guys, you don't understand. And here's a great article. Great article, Business Insider. Look, I'll send it to you offline. But Business Insider, and it says how the Clinton surplus destroyed the economy. Okay, and they interview Stephanie Kelton directly in there. And let me tell you something. She breaks it down in spades. You will never. And like I said, I will send you this. It's a great article. Business Insider, how the Clinton surplus destroyed the economy. Something to that effect.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's very important we understand that, you know, we're getting ready to start looking at new progressives. What about Tulsi? All of a sudden, our people are going to be like, don't bash Tulsi. Don't bash her. Please don't bash Tulsi. And you're going to be like, well, listen, I know economics. I can't pretend I don't to accommodate your need to hero worship. Does she understand the fact that debt and deficits are a bunch of bullshit? If she doesn't, she's just as bad. She just looks better. Okay?
Same thing.
That's it. And so it's very important to me that people understand, and this is a challenge I'm going to throw at you, Jamal. You're a sharp guy. You've got a great show, and you've got a great following. I need you to join me and help him push this ball because, brother, we are up against it, man. I'm telling you, we are up against it in a big way. And I'm telling you, our own people are going to push really bad politicians, and those politicians are going to do really bad things because they're accommodating the people that don't know any better. And its vicious cycle will continue to go. And so it's up to people that are awake and aware to spread that word by any means necessary. And this is where the fist goes up and Malcolm says, I hear you, because this is what we've got to do. It literally is by any means necessary. We got to go into every community. We got to go into every place, and we've got to speak truth to power. And that's what I've been doing for 2 years now straight, every freaking day, man, 7 days a week, nonstop. And we got to do it, man. We got to do it, or we're going to go down in flames.
You have my full agreement on this one. I think it's a big deal. I think it's insane to have this conversation about something that's created out of thin air when your environment is at stake. Or just lives in general. Just people, you know, enduring one calamity after the next, not because they have to, not because we have scarcity, but purely because of some, you know, this idea of an economic system that's just kind of limbers on. This is a good one. This is from Zox. How will MMT affect our allies when we can simply print money, pay them off, and call it a day?
Well, first of all, that's not what I said.
I know. I'm just acting away.
No. I'm just saying so Sox understands it's not what we said. First of all, Congress has to write a bill. We don't just randomly print money. Okay, that's not how any of this works. You got to get 535 people to agree on something, write a bill, and then submit it and get the president to sign off, and then it happens, right? Every dollar, even today, even while you think we're not printing money, right here, right now, every dollar that we spent was printing money as we bombed the bejesus out of the rest of the world. Every one of those was that same thing. And every other country does the same thing. You know, Japan has a 250% debt to GDP thing, right? This is ridiculous. Yes. Okay. And they're fine. They've got more equality in Japan than we do. They got more production than we do. Okay. They are rock solid with 250%. I mean, this is, why are we even remotely fussing about this, right? I mean, when you hear people say, you know, you're in the company of someone that is like trying to carve a turkey with a spoon. So here, we got this situation where all of our other allies do the same thing, right? And all the other countries already have single payer. All the other countries are already giving people college. They're doing these things. We are behind because we're rugged individualists, you know, and so we're not doing anything but catching up, you know. We're kicking the craziness out, and we're trying to embrace humanity again. That's it.
That is the way that you're usually attacked, though, right? I mean, and I'm not saying Zox attacked. I'm just saying when people are having the conversation about it, oftentimes I think it gets boiled down to this. So you can just print $1 million and give it to every American. I mean,
no one ever said that.
Yeah,
it's
nobody
all
ever said
real resources. Congress has to write a bill. You know, Jill Stein said we were going to do QE for the 99%. Can't be done. That's not how it's done.
Explain that. I heard you give a lecture on this part. I found this absolutely fascinating. 2 points. What is QE, and why is it not possible to do QE for college loans? So what has to happen, you have to have accounts at the Federal Reserve, okay? So what the Fed does is shifts debts within its banking system because those reserves never leave the banking system ever, okay? So what they could do, hypothetically, is Congress could write a bill, and they could say, we're going to authorize $250 billion a year to go towards paying off these student loans. So people never see it, but those loans are paid off, and Congress authorizes the money. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. But the bottom line is that all the Federal Reserve, because the Fed cannot print money. The Fed cannot create net financial assets. It can only shift them around. Congress alone can create new money. So in order to have that done, you would have to have an account at the Fed. Everybody would have to have accounts there, and then they could debit and credit those accounts. That's not how it's done, okay? Now, we could give everybody... You see what I mean? So the big places that own these debts, they do have them there. So there is a possibility that Congress could write a bill telling the Fed to go ahead and eradicate those things, pay them off, make it flush, and end it. They could do that, but that would require an act of Congress yet again. So really, so it's never a situation of you're just printing money. I mean, that's never the case. Ultimately, you have to get some consensus. Congress has to make that determination.
Every single time.
One key point, the QE. I was watching a video that you had where a young woman and you went back and forth on this thing of QE. I think you guys were saying the same thing. I think you were saying it in slightly different ways.
She was trying.
This idea of you were making a point like, look, they're just moving around deck chairs. They're not actually getting that money out of the bank. It's like if I'm changing values, all of this money is in house and I'm moving around where this money is. She was trying to make the point of saying, well, it was being written down that whether it was being in-house or not, ultimately, from the perspective of some outside force, it looks as if those debts vanished. Right. It was like accounting trickery of sorts.
So the bottom line is that QE, it was a terrible idea, okay? But it's really, at the end of the day, it didn't really add anything. What it did was it allowed banks more room to provide private credit to you and I, okay? That's the problem, right? We don't want us to go into private debt because you and I can't make our own money. We are strapped. Now, all of a sudden, we are slaves to that debt. However, the federal government, it could spend money and we wouldn't have to have that debt. Do you see what I mean? So that whole accounting identity, right? So what I was trying to explain to her was, listen, because Congress won't spend, QE was one way to provide some liquidity to the economy. It's up to Congress to provide new net financial assets by spending on us. Since they won't do that, the Fed only has a couple tools at its disposal, and it used those tools to try and keep the economy from completely bottoming out. Okay,
it's like accounting trickery of sorts.
Exactly, it was just swapping debt for liquidity. It was not the way to go, and you really need to look. Anytime we blame somebody, we really need to blame Congress. It really is the fault of Congress, because the Fed, quite frankly, is a creature of Congress, okay? Yeah. The Fed doesn't do anything. What the Fed is a giant scorekeeper, okay? Congress, however, makes new money. Fed, you make deposits into this account, we'll spend it. The Fed goes, aye, aye, Captain, I'll do it. Government checks don't bounce. So this is what I was trying to convey to her. She didn't understand the fact that the reason why the banks were doing these things was because Congress wasn't doing their job. right?
Right.
And so at the end of the day, we could have let the banks fail. We could have done any number of things. That's not really the point of what we're talking about here. The Fed was using its monetary space to shift things around within its purview to try and keep the economy from going belly up, because all we had at our disposal was bank credit, because Congress has stopped spending on us. You want to see a revival, you want to see debt go down, watch Congress spend on us, and all of a sudden we don't have to borrow money. All of a sudden private debt will diminish and we'll start breathing again. But that's because Congress isn't spending. And that was the point I was trying to make to her, was she's sitting there grousing about this instead of grousing that Congress isn't spending. And it's like, it was unfathomable.
Like you guys were saying something similar. It was like, I think it sounded like there was a specific word that needed to be said to get both people to say, aha.
Well, now you got to understand, they come from a school called American Monetary Institute, okay? And it's a full reserve banking and the Fed, all this other stuff. And I'm like, listen, guys, so what you're telling me is before we save the first life, before we fix the environment, before we give people single payer, before we do any of this stuff, we got to end the Fed, we got to green the dollar, we got to end private loans, we got to do all this stuff. And then 50 years later, because you know it's a battle, 50 years later, then we'll worry about the environment. Oh, man.
That's the Ron Paul argument. Yeah, that's the Ron Paul. That's the Ron.
Sorry, dude. My phone died.
No, there you go. All right, so Steve's phone passed. Look, guys, I want to thank you for tuning in. This was absolutely awesome. I have to be honest, I'm fascinated by this. Some of it is a bit above my head. I understand the basics of it, at least based on the interviews and everything else I kind of have dug into, or the lectures that I've sat in on. But Steve is the guy to go to in progressive circles to talk about MMT. So he was nice enough to come on and have a conversation. So I am immensely appreciative to Steve. Don't stress the phone falling apart. It's okay. Steve, he's alive. It's just the telephone. He's okay. Look, guys, thank you for showing up. Thank you for showing up. I hope this was illuminating. I hope this gave information that you didn't necessarily have, maybe didn't necessarily, or add a little bit more context to this whole idea of what MMT is, what people are talking about when they're talking about modern monetary theory. And part of the reason I wanted to do this, I had a few people early on who was like, dude, you need to learn about MMT. You need to learn about MMT. I heard nothing about it. Nothing about it. I had heard nothing about it till I started doing this channel. So at the very least, I hope this was, I guess, a basic introductory course into this. And of course, like anything else, there are arguments for and against. This is more so the basics of, this is the basic theory, or this is the basic idea or understanding behind MMT. Yeah, I appreciate you guys signing on. I appreciate everyone signing on. So I'm going to rest. So you guys have a good night. Thank you.